I started my smartphone fascination back in 2013, which was 6 years ago, when image stabilization wasn't really in any kind of cameras, let alone smartphones at all. But over those 6 years, a lot has changed, and a lot of smartphones, even lower end ones to this day, have image stabilization of some sort. So when Feiyutech said they wanted to send out the Vimble 2, I was kind of intrigued because I wanted to see if smartphone gimbals were even worth it now, since we have all that stabilization technology even in our smartphones. Google's Pixel series of smartphones use class-leading hybrid technologies that allow for optical stabilization to merge with electronic stabilization to create a really, really smooth effect, and even smartphones that have OIS or EIS seem to do decent jobs on their own. So that again begs the question, are smartphone gimbals worth it? Well, Feiyutech sent out their Vimble 2, and today I'm going to find out. I tried a couple of different setups with different smartphones and different camera configs. So to start with, I tried the Pixel 3a on its own because I know it has excellent stabilization, so I wanted to test that kind of vanilla without any kind of gimbal. Then I wanted to try kind of the same scenario with the Pocophone, handheld, doing the same movements just to test its stabilization. And then I wanted to add that Pocophone to the Vimble 2, which is our smartphone gimbal in this test, and run 3 tests, both going one way and the other. So technically I'm doing the same walk 6 times. I'm using the front camera, which is I would call the selfie camera, and the rear camera, of course, being the main shooter. On the Pocophone we have 2, and on the Pixel 3a we just have 1. I don't currently have access to an iPhone or an iOS device, so unfortunately I wasn't able to test that. It would be cool if I could have tested like an iPhone XS or something, but I don't have access to that right now. Before we get to the results, I want to talk a little bit about the Vimble, since I'm not sponsored, but it was nice that Feiyutech sent this over in the first place. The case that this thing comes in is pretty bulky, and I would say that it could fit in a backpack, but it would take up an awful lot of room. And I feel like without it, it's kind of, the gimbal's very flimsy and it could break, it's quite fragile. So you kind of need that little kind of foam box case thing, but at the same time, it's kind of a pain in the butt to carry around. This is one of the things against mobile gimbals because, you know, the point of a smartphone camera is it's easy, it's handy, it's just there. You don't want to have to set up or do anything with your gimbal. So that's the first kind of hit at smartphone gimbals. The second point is, remember, the smartphone gimbals only really have a load of around 400 grams before they're too much and the motors can't handle it anymore. So you can use some smartphone lenses depending on the weight and cases and stuff like that, but you cannot use bigger cameras on a smartphone gimbal. Even if you could somehow adapt the mount for it to work, it just wouldn't work because the motors are not strong enough. So this is the trouble with things like this, is they're not transferable over if, for say, in 6 months' time, you really wanted to get into proper filmmaking. The good thing about smartphone gimbals is you're going to pay around £100 for something like this, or maybe £50 used, versus a full gimbal, which is like £500 to £600, or let's say £300 used. So you're paying an awful lot less, which is a good thing, but at the same time you're getting nowhere near the flexibility. Anyway, as you can see here, I'm running my test, or walking my test, up and down my garden. I went up to the end, turned around and came back, and I did that 6 times, which was fun, and I did that for every single scenario. As you can see by the footage, the Pixel 3a is the clear winner, which was actually kind of surprising. Like, I knew that the stabilization was good. I knew it was very good, actually. But the fact that it kind of beat the gimbal was just insane for me. It was a lot smoother and a lot more natural. It didn't have that weird jerky motion. It does certainly have some of that to some degree because it is kind of using a gyro EIS. However, I feel like it's a lot more natural than the Vimble 2, which we've got the Pocophone on. Obviously, the vanilla Pocophone has come last here because, I mean, what were you expecting? Still a very good image, and to be honest, every time I use that phone, and I know I bang on about it, but every time I use that Pocophone, I realise how good the camera is and how much better it's got over software updates. And then slap bang in the middle is the Pocophone on the Vimble 2, and as you can see, it's kind of difficult to maneuver, it's kind of difficult to control because you've got to kind of have your hand on the handle of the gimbal, and then if you wanted to adjust anything, you kind of have to twist the gimbal kind of awkwardly. So it is awkward, and it definitely was for me kind of doing a 180 and turning around, but at the same time, it's not the scenario that I expect everyone to use that gimbal in. Considering the size of these setups, I'm absolutely blown away that the Pixel 3a one. Remember, it's a lower end smartphone. It's the lowest end Pixel that's ever been released, and somehow it's just beaten a gimbal, and it seems to be beating everything right now. So yeah, What this test has really proven is that smartphone gimbals aren't really worth it. If you are kind of an owner of an S4 or an S5 and your phone's worth about £80 and you want to get into, let's say, filmmaking, then it's not really worth going with a gimbal. And they were very difficult to justify to start with. Like I said, the extra heft, the extra cost, that's another thing to charge. I didn't mention that before. And especially Feiyutech's app that you have to use to kind of use the smart controls on the gimbal itself. It's not incredibly versatile, it's not very good, and I'll be honest, it's not Feiyutech's fault. I really appreciate them sending this out, by the way, and it is interesting to try out, but it's not Feiyutech's fault. It's kind of smartphone gimbals in general. You can go through Zhiyun, Feiyutech, I'm sure DJI has one. It's very awkward to get a decent, like a properly good smartphone gimbal because the smartphone isn't really designed to be a proper camera. The reason that smartphone cameras like the one that I've got on the S10e do so well is the fact that they've got that stabilization built in because it just goes in your pocket. A smartphone gimbal is something else to carry around. It's extra heft and it kind of takes away from the fact that you have a brilliant smartphone, a brilliant camera in your smartphone in your pocket. So what am I trying to say here? Well, don't go and buy a smartphone gimbal. If you can get one really cheap or you're really interested in how gimbals work, then by all means, it's still something. It's not a waste of money, but I just certainly would spend money in other areas. And if you own a smartphone that has good OIS, I'd say anything from the Samsung S7 Edge and S7 and up, and perhaps an iPhone 6s Plus or a 7, you're going to have decent stabilization on there anyway. And if you really want super good stabilization in sports, go out and buy a GoPro Hero 7 Black. They're about £300 and they're going to give you much better results, especially due to the fact that they're meant to be an action camera. There are other things to worry about if you're worrying about like filming, such as dynamic range, framing, the fact that smartphones tend to have between 24 and 80mm lenses and can be difficult to distinguish them, especially due to the fact that the telephoto lenses tend to be like 8 megapixels versus the 24 on the standard. It's really awkward, and there are other things to worry about. My personal recommendation is to save your money, and if you're really interested in filmmaking, go and pick up something like a Sony a6000 or something like that, instead of wasting your money on something that's a gimmick. But before I go, I want to ask you, if you do have a smartphone gimbal, to share like what your feedback is in the comments. I'd be really interested to see if anyone actually uses them. I've had mine for a couple of weeks, I've taken it out a couple of times, and yeah, it's been basically a waste of time. But maybe you use it all the time. I mean, they're fairly cheap compared to standard gimbals, and I want to see if you guys actually use them. And with that, I feel like this video has been kind of a rant. This video is over, so thank you to Feiyutech for sending out the Vimble. I will leave a link to buy it in the video description, but honestly, I don't recommend you go and do that because it's kind of difficult to justify any smartphone gimbal. Again, I've not been sponsored, I've not been paid to say any of this, and I didn't reach out to Feiyutech. They reached out to me. They said, dude, do you want to check out a Vimble? I said, yeah. And that was probably the worst decision they made that week. Again, not a hit piece on Feiyutech, just on smartphone gimbals. And with that, it's time for me to end this video. So thank you all so much for watching. Please do like, dislike, comment, and subscribe if you're interested in a video like this one. Also, check out my social media. All links will be in the video description as always. And a massive shout out to my patrons. You guys are fantastic. So thanks for that. My name's been Ryan Thomas, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.